Good day, everybody. Just give it a second here while folks get settled in. So my name is Lisa and I work for the New York Alliance. Pleasure to have all of you with us today. While the speakers are presenting, please keep your microphones on mute. If you have questions, you can certainly utilize the chat box and kind of type them in there. That would be great. And again, thank you for joining us. When that being said, I'm going to turn it over to today's presenters, George and Mary Lou. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everyone. We're going to begin by giving us a short bio of who we are and why we're here. Mary Lou?
Hi, I'm Mary Lou. I am a parent of a young man who is in life sharing, and I'm going to say life sharing instead of shared living. I'm here because I just believe so strongly in life sharing, shared living, and want to share with great excitement what we've been doing.
Yes, and she's very humble in who she is. She also happens to be the chair of the board of directors of Nonotuck, and she was very instrumental, and I would believe the force behind what you're going to learn about today, which is Brooklyn Street neighborhood and its intentional community. I'm George Fleischner. I'm the CEO and president of Nonotuck Resource Associates. This is my 35th year in the position. The agency is also celebrating its 50th year of existence. It was created in 1972 by a group of parents whose children were at the local institution in Western Massachusetts called Belchertown State School. And the parents were totally unhappy with the services and the conditions at the state school. And so they lobbied their state legislature as well as members of the U.S. House to get some money to create a community-based service for their kids, which they were successful on, and it became the first community-based service for children with intellectual disabilities in the state of Massachusetts. It was based on sort of this parent model where a husband and wife lived with the 4 kids, and then as the institutionalization began to help happen in Belchertown, the agency began to grow. I arrived in 1987. By then, there were group homes scattered throughout the western part of the state of Massachusetts. The agency was overseeing, and I came to the agency with a different vision. In the early 1980s, I had originally worked in 1980 as a legal advocate in our local mental health institution, and there was an agreement between the state of Massachusetts and the plaintiffs, the people who resided and who would reside at the Northampton State Hospital, to close the hospital. There was an agreement called a consent decree, and to close the hospital, there had to be a community-based system that was being created based on residential models as well as day service models and emergency services models. My grant on the wards of the hospital was to get people out of there, to represent them in ISP and different types of personalization meetings, et cetera. And it was a 1-year grant, and I moved out of that job into that emerging community-based system and began running group homes, which I became pretty disillusioned with pretty quickly after being in charge of them. I began to seek out different options, and I ended up in the western part of New York, in Syracuse, at a large community, and saw what it meant for people with disabilities to live with people without disabilities, and came back from that stay in that large community. We had different ideals and transformative sort of thinking around how people should be served. And by 1987, when I got the job as the executive, or the president CEO of Nonotuck, I began right away talking to the people that the agency provided services to, their family members, and the government, which happened to be what they used to call, what they called developmental disabilities services, DDS, and suggesting that people might be better served living in a more personalized and caring service called, we began calling back then, supported living, which in a few years after that became shared living. But met an extreme amount of resistance about that, thinking that the people that we were providing services were too needy, had too many different sort of handicaps to be served in family homes or people's homes like yours and mine. Well, we convinced those we serve, as well as their family members, that that would be a better alternative service. And so we began moving people and closing group homes. And in a 2-year period from 1991 to 1993, we moved 55 people into 53 different personalized shared living homes and closed 15 of our group homes, never to turn around again. Since then, we did this on a model that basically, I mean, we were alone in doing this. So we put together a group of people to create a model of what shared living would look like. And we came up with sort of 5 different areas of the model. And what the first, we felt that everything was going to move off of what the values were in the organization, the values of what shared living was going to be. This was going to separate us and give us a good foothold in what the service is going to be. And what those values were when they were developed actually in the mid-'80s, and I brought to the agency in the late 80s and implemented them in the early 90s, was was 4 or 5 tenets of what shared living was going to be. The first was the values. The values were based on a mutuality of love between people. Love was a 4-letter word back then, and often is now, that was never really talked about in service delivery, but mutuality of love between people, a respect between people, a mutuality of respect for people's humanness, and the ability of people to be vulnerable in front of each other, and finally, an interdependence between people, where not only the disabled person, which would be, of course, dependent on the non-disabled person, but vice versa as well. Is that even in today, in our best shared living circumstances, they're not unlike our relationships, our closest relationships, where we feel a dependence on those we care about and we love, as well as they feel a dependence on us. And this was all done, and again, this is the values. This is all done in a search for, as Mary Lou described, the relationship of her sons in a life sharing model where there was no real financial profit that was involved in this relationship. So love, mutuality of respect, vulnerability, interdependence, without a financial profit that was served within the relationship. We have many, many relationships in shared living that have reached the level of life sharing, where there's really no profit in that. So we have the values is the first tenet, and those are the values that still drive our agency today and our shared living today. Then the development of shared living is when we take a really close look at who the person is that's going to receive the service, and the person who's going to provide the service, and we qualify after a deep and invasive look at the person who's going to provide the service, and offer to the family and the person who's receiving the service a choice of who they would like to live with. And they give us in the development the type of person they might want to live with, where they might want to live, decisions that people don't ordinarily get when they're moving into a residential program. Typically, they're sort of wedged into where there's a vacancy or a bed. But we offer people choices of where they're going to live and with whom they're going to live. And we serve people on a wide array of people that have a wide array of needs as well as skills and desires. So that's the development. At some point, we make the family makes a decision, and then we move into the sort of the third phase, which is the transition phase, and that's where we make sure before people move that everything's in order, and then people move. And the fourth piece of it is the support and the monitoring, which is sort of a balance that you're in there. We go into the house, the home, and we support that relationship while we also monitor to make sure that people are safe, people have authority and sort of power within the household, people are dressed well, they're eating well, they're happy, et cetera. And then finally, we put into place a sort of a safeguard so that if something happened to the caregiver, like in winter, something fell and would happen to be hospitalized, how are we going to move to safeguard that situation while keeping people where they live, and how we're going to sort of make sure that people are cared for while the caregiver gets better. So using those values and those tenets, we have over the years, we've grown to the extent that we provide shared living services across the state of Massachusetts, from the far western border all the way to the Cape in the northeast of Massachusetts, and obviously in the central part of the state. And we serve about 330, 340 people in shared living, which would be 90 or so group homes that aren't out there. So that's number one. And number two, in the early 2000s, we began another service called adult family care, which has a different source of funding. It comes from sort of a mass health funding, where families can keep their loved ones at home, people with a disability or an intellectual disability, as opposed to having people enter institutions and with a stipend, a daily stipend, and we provide nursing as well as case management support to these people. And we now serve about 900 people across the state in that service. So, this is where we are in 2022. The key to this presentation is what happened in 2009, and then that's where Mary Lou approached me and asked that I meet with her and some of her friends and neighbors about creating an intentional community on Brooklyn Street in North Adams, Massachusetts. And so tell the story, Mary Lou.
Okay. Before that, we had been meeting for 2 or 3 years. And when I say we, there was about 4 families. 3 of us happened to have individuals in our family who had some special needs, were served through DDS in various forms. At that point, my son was in a group home, which was not working particularly well for him, but I was being told repeatedly that he was way too severe for anything else. But we started getting together and saying, what do we want? And again, the other people who were involved were friends of ours, friends who really cared about our kids, who had long-term relationships. What was interesting is we started with, what do we want? We don't know what we want. Maybe we want to form our own group home, really good one. We're going to hire the staff. We're going to do this. We're going to do that. We started looking around. We visited every place we could go at this point. We went to Camp Hill Village in New York. We went to L'Arche in Syracuse. And I should say, in terms of who we were, my history is that I was at Syracuse University for a graduate program, for a doctoral program. And certainly that was the mecca of inclusive education. And I just learned so much there. It's also where I met my son, who at that point was living at Syracuse Developmental Center, similar to Belchertown State School that you described, after blowing out of 5 placements. And I use the word in quotes, because he did things like climb on the roof in the middle of the night, got up in the middle of the night and cooked in one family, and they immediately sent him back. One family found him swimming in their swimming pool at 3 a.m. Luckily, he was, as a 5-year-old at that point, able to swim. But in any case, after blowing out 5 places, he ended up there. As part of my doctoral program, I ended up meeting him. He says he chose me. I say I chose him. I guess the reality is that we chose each other. But anyway, that was the beginning of our story together. So I guess I have to start by saying who we are not. We went through this process of looking for stuff. You know, we liked something about every place that we saw, and there were other parts that we didn't like. Camp Hill had a wonderful, wonderful program. It was too isolated for us in a lot of ways. We talked to people in Australia, we talked and visited people in Louisville, Kentucky. Canada had some very helpful programs, and we started to explore this option of intentional communities. Our kids made it very clear to us that they did not want to live together. One of the 3 young men, who's totally nonverbal, told us nonverbally in a million ways that, you know, he loved my son, but he wasn't going to listen to him and his loud music. And my son was very verbal about, he didn't like the fact that Aaron kept the TV on all the time and stayed up in the middle of the night. And he liked him a lot, but now that they had to live together, Stephen wanted no part of it. And it became clear that was our dream. Let's put these 3 guys in this nice group home. No, they didn't want anything to do with it. So we learned a valuable lesson right from the start about listening to our sons, really listening to what they were saying. Then we started exploring intentional communities. We visited a lot of intentional communities. We talked to people in Canada. Most intentional communities were people who were being served through their agencies. What we wanted is to really be part of our family life still. We wanted to be near our kids, not necessarily in the same house, but really near our kids. So what would that look like? We started looking at properties. We started thinking about building. None of us were independently wealthy. I had concerns. I did not want my son living in somebody else's home, because after his experience with institutionalization, he needed someplace that was his. And I had the fear at that point that shared living providers might come and go, but he needed permanence. So that was one of our thoughts. I want to tell you who we're not. We are not a program. We are not an agency. We're not even a service. We are neighbors. We are families that live on Brooklyn Street, and there happen to be 5 people on Brooklyn Street right now who are served through DDS. And what you'll hear is how they're served in totally different ways and have totally different needs. So who are we? We are people who believe in life sharing. We are at this point an intentional community. Our mission that we came up with, and believe me, we had long, long conversations about all of this. Our mission is to create a sustainable, multi-generational, life-sharing community within the larger community of North Adams, a community that includes families, friends, and persons with different abilities. We had an aha moment, and that aha moment came with a meeting with George. I had asked him to come and talk to our group, help us sort out where we were, because quite frankly, we're all over the place. We want something, but we don't know quite what. We went, at that point, Mel had moved from group home into shared living with another agency. It wasn't really working. By the way, you talked about the process of matching them. I think they had maybe 2 brief meetings before they threw them together in the house. Which is typical of many unfortunate experiences with shared living. But we had this real aha moment with George. And George, I'm gonna have you tell us what you told us that made all the difference in the world.
Well, I think I first reaffirmed their questions about, because I had worked with a couple of other, or I had been approached by a couple other intentional communities, and they knew what my interest was. They knew that I was interested in that. They had a sense of my value base. But each of these, except for one that was on the South Shore of Massachusetts, each of them came with a building in mind. They said they have this building they have in mind, and this is terrific. What we can do is we can move a bunch of disabled people into this building, and you know, they can live in harmony together, and you know, we even want to put together their program. And each one of those 3 or 4 different sort of groups that came forward to me, I said, you stop thinking about where they're gonna live, but begin asking the people who they want to live with, the people, your children, adult children, who they want to live with, where they want to live. And so most of those three groups just sort of walked away with a huff. But Mary Lou, I reaffirmed, first of all, that they were going about it the right way, which was asking the people who were going to be at the center of this service who they wanted to live with in the way that they wanted to live, and they were pretty clear about that. So that immediately eliminated any type of idea of building something or finding a building where everybody could live together and they could staff it or whatever they wanted to do. So that was a reaffirmation. The second thing is that I said to them, after listening to them and having an idea of what was going on within this group, I said, intentionally or not, unintentionally or not, you are now an intentional community. You have been one. You're getting together on a regular basis. You're trying to define who you are. You're already working towards many goals. You're already getting together a lot. So you don't even worry about how you create an intentional community, because you are one.
And with that, one of the things we did, we sat with George and we said, what's important to us? What's important to our loved ones, but what's important to us? And we came up with things like, we want a balance of privacy and community. We strongly believe that all people matter. Everyone has to have a voice at the table. We want to be multi-generational. We want to be multi-ethnic. We want to be accepting of everybody who's with us. We want to share common resources. We want to provide affordable, flexible housing options. And we don't know quite what all those options are going to look like yet, but we know we need them. We want something that's safe. We want something that's sustainable way beyond us. We want permanence. You know, I don't think there's a parent out there who might be listening who hasn't at some point say to themselves, what happens when I'm not there? What happens when I can't do this anymore? How do we think in terms of longevity? How do we think in terms of independence? And we were very clear that independence didn't mean pulling away from our kids, which is what some of the experts had advised us to do. It meant helping them move towards independence while we were in the picture, and we still wanted to be in the picture. We wanted shared space. So we talked about things like a common house. We found that every intentional community we went to, one of the things was shared space where we could really get together, celebrate community. So that was important to us. We believed in inclusion. We believed in self-determination. We talked about being not just in the community, but of the community. And that was really important to us. And we talked about lifelong membership for all of us. We talked about places where we could really probably, if we chose, not only our loved ones who might have needs, but us too, where we could age in place. So those were some of the things we started talking about. At that point, George said, I think you're ready for some outside help, because we're going around in circles. We're coming up with core statements, value statements. And Nonotuck hired for us a woman named Laura Finch. And Laura Finch was, her specialty was co-housing, community housing. And she came and did a weekend workshop with us. We shut ourselves away for 2 full days and had many meetings afterwards. She questioned us. She trained us in things like consensus, decision-making. She asked hard questions, and we came to conclusions and came up with some hard answers, came up with more questions. And that was when we started really getting together and saying, okay, what we need to do now is really kind of formalize a little bit more. We need a mission, we need a vision, we need an action plan. And Nonotuck, again, has been instrumental in helping us with a lot of that. I guess what I want to do is share who are the people, the 5 people in our agency who are served through DDS, because I want you to see the wide range of services that they have and receive. And I do this with all of their explicit input and permission. So anything I say has been either said by them or cleared by them. That's really important for you to know. Patricia is a young lady who lives right now independently in an apartment on Brooklyn Street. She was removed from her home when she was in high school and went through a series of living with adult family care and placements that for one reason or another just did not work out. At some point she threw up her hands and she said, I don't want to do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. She had no contact with her biological family. Patricia has many needs, but one of the things about her needs that's very different is she has very strong expressive language, but has a real problem with receptive language. So that throws people off. They're thinking she's understanding, they're thinking she's kind of got it. And in fact, she's really struggling to figure out what's going on. Puts across a great facade, and it took her a long time. She's still working on learning to say, I don't have a clue what that means or what you just said. But she is one of the most determined, fun-loving young ladies that we have ever met. So at that point, when she threw up her hands and her, I think it was her third placement was ending, she came and lived with me for about 4 months. We worked really hard on what do you want? What do you need to know to get there? She decided she wanted her own apartment. And about 4 months later, this was 4 years ago now, she moved into her own apartment on Brooklyn Street. She wants me to tell you that she rescued a dog, she rescued a cat, she loves her pets dearly and they love her. Her goal someday is to maybe buy a house of her own. She gets from DDS, it started with 8 hours a week of services. Now she gets 4 hours a week of services. And they help her with things like shopping, running her household, sorting out the mail, paying the bills, cooking, taking her grocery shopping, taking her to medical appointments. But she truly is supported by many families on Brooklyn Street and has different relationships with different people. And she supports all of us in many ways, from helping to take care of our animals if we're on vacation, to running errands. She works 15 hours a week as a bagger at a local grocery store. And she inevitably calls a couple of the older people before she comes home and says, what do you need? What can I bring you? She's just such a vital part of our community. Very fun loving. There is never a holiday or any occasion that goes unnoticed by her with cards, phone calls, emails. Sometimes we have to limit the amounts of emails and the time she can email, but she's just very enthusiastic. So that's Patricia. Another young man on our street, Artie. Patricia's about 24 years old, by the way. Artie, who is 40, lives with his parents. His father has recently had to quit work to stay home with him because Artie refuses to go to the day programs that he was going to. The agency that supports him, which is not Nonotuck, said, okay, if he won't come to programs, we'll give him services at home. What they give him is an hour and a half twice a week of respite. Ouch. You know, that's extremely difficult for his family, who have also recently adopted 3 other children, ages 6, 8, and 15. They were family members who in another state had gone into foster care. This mom and dad said, we can't have this, we need to bring them here. So their family suddenly grew. They're struggling. They are absolutely struggling, and they are very excited about possibilities of hooking up with all of this, hooking up with Brooklyn Street. So that's Artie. Artie is fun loving. If he knows you well, he has this great sense of humor. One of his recent things he did, he saw another member of Brooklyn Street in a grocery store and yelled out, Robert, when did you get out of jail? It's really good to see you back in the community. And as you can imagine, everybody sort of stopped and looked. It was funny, and he thought that was hysterical. So that's Artie. Alan is another young man on Brooklyn Street, and he lives with his mother. His goal, and he said to make sure I share this, is to go into shared living, life sharing, with somebody like Eric, who is my son's provider, and he wants it to be on Brooklyn Street. I think he's more ready to do that quickly than his parent is at this point, but he's ready. Alan graduated from a technical school with electricity. One of the things he recently did is go around, and anybody on the street who wanted lights that came on automatically, he installed for us on our porches, outside lights. He has probably been hit harder by COVID than anybody because he's very, very dependent on routines. His world kind of fell apart. You know, he lost his job at Goodwill because it closed for a long time. His structures, Ellen is a fine musician and plays with several musical groups, one of which plays at Mass MoCA, our Museum of Contemporary Art, on Saturday mornings. That stopped for a while. He's really been hurting. What Alan gets is from DDS is an hour of counseling a week, 3 hours of respite and rehabilitation services. Right now, he spends 3 days a week at a day hab type program and 2 days a week in a redemption center that they operate. He doesn't like it. He wants a real job with real people as fast as possible. But he's hanging in there. Then there's Mel.
Can I interrupt for a second?
Certainly.
I think a really key aspect of Alan and his mother is that they lived in Williamstown, which is this sort of, it's where Williams College is, and so it's an upscale community, to Brooklyn Street to specifically be part of this community. It's pretty amazing.
Yeah, and it's really interesting that you say that, George. That's a good point. At one point, someone from Williamstown, his mother teaches at Williams College, and at some point, someone said to her, "Why are you leaving this, $400,000 home in Williamstown to move to Brooklyn Street?" And frankly, Brooklyn Street is one of those streets that could have gone either way. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. But why in the world are you doing that? And she didn't miss a beat. And she said, "Well, Brooklyn Street is our future. It's Alan's future. Williamstown was our past." And that's the story. And they have become very active in this whole process and have joined that original group in terms of kind of being a steering committee for what we're doing. So yeah, thank you. I think that is a really important point.
Yeah.
Alan loves music. He knows everything about music. He also wanted me to tell you that he understands the New York subway system better than anybody. And if you give him right now, instantly, where you want to go, he will tell you which lines to get on, how to get there. He's got it memorized. And one of his proud possessions is a shirt that has the New York subway system printed all over it, or a jacket, I guess. Alan is brilliant. He is truly brilliant. And as I said, he's probably hurting more than anybody right now because he's so aware of what's going on in the world, both in terms of COVID, in terms of politics. It's a tough place to be. Alan and my son's shared living person. I don't even want to say shared living provider.
Right.
His support person, his roommate, his housemate. Alan and he have become close friends, and they love to play music together. So you'll often see the two of them sitting on one of their decks or porches, playing the guitars and drum and making music for the rest of the street. Mel, my son, has often been called, I was laughing during the introduction, he's often been called the ambassador. Not only of Brooklyn Street, but North Adams. He's very outgoing in many ways. He makes friends with everybody. His loves, he said to tell you, include trains, music. He's a groupie. George's son is a fine musician, and Melvin loves nothing more than following him to some venue and listening to music. He went up at Tanglewood one day 2 summers ago and introduced himself to John Williams, who started emailing him and sending him things in the mail, because John Williams is one of his heroes and conductor of the Boston Symphony Orchestra. Mel's probably never met a stranger. He has some very classically autistic type characteristics, if we want to think of him that way. When I first met him and he was living at Syracuse Developmental Center, I was telling George before we started talking this morning, the director of Syracuse Developmental Center said, "Don't take him out of here. Don't leave him. He's much too severe to live in a community." But there was something in his eyes. I knew he could certainly live in a community. He wanted out of that place badly, as typified by the fact that he had eloped and run away several times at the age of 5 and 6, and they found him several streets away. But parting shot, the day that he left to come home and live with me, the director said to me, "Don't worry, I'm keeping his bed open. He'll be back." Yeah. When we had him leave the group home where he had gone after high school because all his friends were going away and he wanted to go to college. So we talked about this group home being sort of his college for living. We made a mistake. Group homes were not for him, and I could go into that, but I feel like I'm probably preaching to the choir here. But when we went to bring him home, at that point, shared living was fairly new. I was told by the DDS person, I can't remember the role of the person,
Service coordinator.
service coordinator, that of course he was much too severe to be in shared living. Well, that was 15 years ago, so he proved them wrong there too. He's been with the same provider, Eric, who is his best friend, his bro. They call each other brothers. He calls Eric's dad Pop, and it's become a whole other family for him. They've been together for about 10 years now. And Eric says that it's been as good for him as for Melvin. And when George, when you were talking about the reciprocity of relationships, I was thinking the second year that they lived together, Eric had fallen and broken his collarbone in a snowboarding accident. And Mel, who took months and months to learn to dress himself, suddenly was dressing Eric. Eric couldn't put his own shirts on, he couldn't button them. And every morning, Mel would help him get himself together and get dressed. And Eric said, I couldn't live alone right now. You know, Mel took over many of the kitchen tasks at that point. Rose to the occasion in a way that we never thought was possible. So again, it's just one example of the beauty of it. Mel's living situation is such that I renovated or retrofitted, whatever you want to say, the house that we live in, so that it's now a duplex. I live in the mother-in-law apartment and they have the main house together, which is nice. We have privacy. We set ground rules about respecting each other's space. But I'm there for backup. I love it when he does these common things that other parents will understand, like runs in my house and says, what do you got good to eat? Grabs something and runs back to his own house. You know, it's just, it's life, it's real life. And it's been wonderful for him. He gets full services from DDS. We are doing a self-determination day program because he just didn't fit any of the programs that existed. He has the shared living program with a generous stipend for respite. And he's happier than I've ever seen him and more independent than I've ever seen him and more capable than anybody thought he could possibly be. The fifth person on our street is Aaron. Aaron is primarily nonverbal. He lives with his dad. He needs intensive services and support 24/7, particularly this last year since his mom passed away. And that was a huge loss to our community. That's one of the pieces of shared living. You become so intertwined with each other's life that her loss was major to all of us. Aaron has a day hab program. He gets 10 hours a week of respite right now. It's not enough. He is being served by another agency, but they are contemplating coming over to Nonotuck as soon as possible. And ultimately, his dad would like to see him in a shared living type situation, a life sharing situation. Aaron is sort of our gentle giant, and he just brings us joy because he's just so gentle and loving, and he will reach out and touch your face. He communicates non-verbally beautifully with his eyes. You know, he has maybe 10 words. His favorite thing in the whole world is just to take long rides, long rides. He loves to eat, particularly in the middle of the night. He sleeps about 2 hours a night. And, you know, single parenting him right now is extremely difficult. And although not officially with quote Nonotuck, they help him in a million ways. So those are the people on Brooklyn Street and the services they receive through DDS. One of the things I want to mention very quickly is that we recently went to DDS and asked if we could have one service coordinator for the street. And they did that. So there's one person now who serves the 5 guys on our street. I should also mention that Artie's adopted siblings, 2 of them are on IEPs. We have another family that moved in the neighborhood recently who have 2 grandchildren who are diagnosed as being on the spectrum. We have a woman who moved into the street a few years ago who called me up and said, "Are you Mel's mother?" And I said, "Yes," and I wasn't quite sure what was coming. And she said, "Oh, good, because I have 2 young children and they're asking me questions about him. Could we bake cookies and come down to your house so they can get to know him and really understand it and be comfortable with this?" Absolutely, I'll bake the cookies. You know, it was just wonderful. She recently said at a workshop that we were giving that part of why she moved to Brooklyn Street was because we were there, and she's at the point where she could be tied up at work, and she knew there were 5 grandmothers she could call and say, will you get my kids off the bus and feed them something? So for her, she said, you know, when we looked at the house, she said it was affordable, but this was a street that could go either way, and I really wasn't sure. And then my realtor told me all about you guys, and she said I decided to move there. Part of why the realtor told her is because we had met with the realtors as part of our process. And again, George was instrumental at helping us come up with some of these ideas. But we had an afternoon tea where we invited the 5 major realtors and explained to them who we were, what we were doing, encouraged them to ask certain people to move to Brooklyn Street. We had 3 houses that were being repossessed at that point, and were very affordable. And there might be certain people who then want to steer away from Brooklyn Street. So we also then, the core families that I talked about, the 5 families, decided we were going to buy one of the houses that was coming up for auction. So for $40,000, we bought a house that needed a lot of work. Luckily, one of the people on our crew had also worked for Habitat for Humanity, and he got them interested in helping us. A year later, Habitat approached us and said, we'd like to do a partnership with Brooklyn Street. We would become your partners. We want to sit and hash it out with you, come up with a formal agreement. We came up with contracts. They now do work for us on Brooklyn Street. They redid a deck for me. No cost, but what I did and what Heather, the college professor, did when they did some work for her is we give a generous donation, which they then use to support other families on Brooklyn Street who can't afford to buy their own materials. So, you know, I guess one story I have to tell is a family on Brooklyn Street with 2 small children who are, you know, quote, typical kids, neurotypical, were in danger of losing their home. They were struggling to make ends meet. Their bathroom and plumbing broke down, and they said, we just don't have money for this, to do this bathroom. Well, they could use our bathroom in our common house, which at that point was operational, while the work was being done. We got Habitat to come in and put in a whole new bathroom for them. They used the money that we had donated, so the family didn't have to buy for goods. And they said, we are now able to stay in our home on the street because of you guys. So we felt like that was a huge accomplishment. You know, we were just so pleased that we could help them out. And also they're just wonderful people, and we want them in our neighborhood. You know, the little girl who is 4 years old now comes up almost daily to our little lending library, takes a book and comes and knocks on my door and says, come read with me. So I sit out and read with her with, you know, my little pug sitting on her lap. And it's just a wonderful thing for me. You know, it's just great. So I get to be sort of a surrogate grandmother to her. We just have a new family who moved down the street that only speaks Spanish. And I'm learning to brush up on some Spanish. They're learning English from us, and it's just a wonderful match. You know, it's just really fun. George, jump in here for a minute.
We have about 5 minutes just to sort of wrap up. So
I'm sorry, there's so much I could say.
I know.
Sorry.
I think that just to quickly talk about Nonotuck's role. At one point, for practical reasons for the Brooklyn Street neighborhood program, they're now affiliated with the agency, so they can use our tax free number so that they can fundraise. And also, you know, it formalizes that relationship so that we can provide money and financial support to them without really getting from some of the funds that we do raise. Meanwhile, we bought Nonotuck bought the common house, and so that's under Nonotuck's name now, and we're in the process. It probably has been delayed after delay of renovating it. But I love the idea of the common house where it will be for the community, Brooklyn Street community, to use as they wish, so that people who don't happen to be part of the Brooklyn Street sort of neighborhood can use it to do whatever they want, to teach classes, to form different types of clubs, etc. So that they, it's really, the idea is to build a really solid community in which is the purpose sort of underlying purpose would be that I would include the people that are on the street. So it's a community builder, and it's really, and I think that Mary Lou and the other people who are part of this core group have done an unbelievable job in just the little things that they think are little, but are amazing in the sort of the develop of community. Yeah, it's a great job.
And for us, their presence means that this is going to live on beyond us. There's permanence there. Some of the things we've done with the Common House, just very quickly, is we share meals. We invite other people on the street in. We have special events. Other people can say, can we use the Common House for a birthday party or for family street parties? We prepare welcome baskets for any new family that moves onto the street and find out what we can about the family, and then do this big welcome basket with a letter explaining who we are and just kind of welcoming them and inviting them to our next event.
There's they used it twice. That what I was involved in this meeting where the mayor of North Adams came to talk to us and to see what he might be able to do with some of the houses on the street. They shut down the street. They didn't ask permission, but they shut it down anyway, and had a Sunday afternoon party, which brought people who were on the fringe of their group, who came out and cooking hot dogs and hamburgers, and music was played. Just a great community sense and a real knowledge of what it means to develop community, which has been so lost in the years. So yeah, it's an amazing idea.
And it's fun. We laugh a lot. We cry together. We fight. We work things through. We are in process. It's always evolving. Where are we going? I'm never sure. We have all sorts of ideas. We have all sorts of hopes. What are some of the things that get in our way? Of course, finances, affordability, finding affordable housing, finding housing options. I should also mention, by the way, our oldest member is 90 years old. It's Alan's grandmother, who also lived in a very affluent place in Williamstown. When her husband passed, she said, I don't really want to live in this community with old people anymore. So she bought one of the houses, totally retrofitted it, did it in such a way that it's totally accessible, has potential for shared living for her grandson at some point. And she is our 90-year-old matriarch of the street. And believe me, she is involved.
There's a really great question about from Chris. And we read it. This is wonderful. How do you ensure that the street maintains its diversity so it doesn't become a disability street? That's something that we've talked about from the beginning. In fact, there was an organization that wanted to come and build and have a group home on the street, and we've done everything we can do to prevent that. We don't want it to become. We want it to become a community, but I think that's a great question, and we're aware of that, and we don't want it to get to be, as you say, Disability Street. Yes.
And that was important to the other residents of Brooklyn Street. We had to really explain that. These are guys, for the most part, who are living here already. Alan was new, Patricia was new, but the other three guys were already part of the street. We're not going to bring in 1 million people. And one of our slogans is, you don't have to live on Brooklyn Street to be part of us. So we have a lot of people who join our activities, but we're not planning, we're actively recruiting families with young kids. We're actively recruiting the folks who just moved in, who are learning English and who are new to this country. I've just talked, and I don't think I've even told George this yet, but I just talked to my major advisor at Syracuse University, who spent 6 months in Australia, by the way, about maybe getting a doctoral student interested in using us as a dissertation. I think that would be really awesome for them to come in and do some documentation about what we're doing. We should talk about the position.
Well, yeah, let's, Maxine has her hand.
Oh, Maxine, yes.
You want to unmute yourself, Maxine?
Hi.
Oh, okay,
Hi.
great.
Yes, I'm wondering, my son is, in self-direction. Can you hear me?
Yes.
My son is in self-direction. he lives 6 minutes away from us, my husband and me. I'm in Washington Heights in his own apartment with a living caregiver. And he has he has, a lot of, he has like around about, 12 hours a day of care, people that I hire. And, my concern and the concern of all the other parents I know is first of all, in terms of the roommate, how do you find a roommate, who will be able to see, who will stay with your child for a given period of time? And number two, how do you guarantee sustainability for this program? For example, right now I have 13 people working with my son. I know that a lot of them are going to move on. I mean, since he's been in this, I've hired over 250 people. So how do you really what is your resource for finding people, and how do you guarantee sustainability? And also, ideally, I would love to do something like you do. But how do I find other people to live, in proximity to my son so we can share resources? For example, OPW will not give. I just want to put in an email, an email to everyone to see who wants to do this. So anyway, I think I made my question clear enough, right?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I mean,
let me see if I can answer that. Maxine, it's a good question. Just as a side thought, and that is that Nonotuck just spent a couple of years looking to see whether or not we could do shared living in New York, and decided against it because of the way that it's the services are created and the money is sort of spent out. And I think that Chris Rizzo could talk forever about how hard it is to do, a type of shared living that we do in Massachusetts, to do it in New York. That's number one. Number two is that, I've been doing this for 30 years, and it's never really been a problem finding people with the hearts and the minds that want to open up their home or their heart to people with disabilities to live with them. And so, we've always kept a pretty large pool of people that we did, as I said during sort of the beginning of my presentation, is that we do a very thorough and deep dive into who might be a caregiver. We qualify them. We don't qualify everybody that applies. They have, I think we've done a good job of asking the right questions, finding out the right answers. And so I think that we do a pretty good job in making the match. The match is what really makes the situation, but it can be done. There are people out there that are into it and into this type of life, that find it not only transformative for the person that may move into the service, but also find it very transformative for them as well.
and
Well, yes, I just want to say one more thing. That's exactly what I've been doing in terms of recruiting people to work with my son. But could you share, do you have some sort of template or something, and also some sort of advertising resource that you use to find these people who have a particular kind of profile of people who aren't going to go move someplace else, aren't going to get married and have children, aren't going to decide to go move someplace, et cetera, and so forth?
Yeah, Mac, why don't well, I'll put up my email for you to send me an email. I think I could go on for a long time about.
I would love to.
Yeah, so
Thank you. I will be in touch with you. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Wonderful with you.
And Maxine, the only thing I want to add to that too is shared interests is a really big way. And what Nonotuck does is very personal. When they advertise, they talk about the person, they talk about interests, they talk about what it would be like to live with this person.
I do all that. Believe me, I do all that.
Yeah.
I'm talking about, my main concern is sustainability. My son has a wonderful life, but how is it going to be sustained? That's
right. And
really
that's certainly my concern too. And for me, the answer really is Nonotuck. We couldn't do this alone without the agency.
And there are other people that can do it. So let's send me an email,
I'll email you.
Maxine,
Yeah.
and I'll get back to you about that.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Good.
I'm going to unmute myself, I guess, if I can figure out how to do it. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I don't know how to unmute myself.
Your time is just probably almost up, yes.
almost 5 minutes or so.
But I would love it if you would talk about the full-time worker that we're
Right,
considering.
we were able to, none of, Brooklyn Street on its own is not supported by the local government. I mean, we do it through funds that we have, or there are people are attached to a particular service, but Brooklyn Street on the whole isn't. But so we went and asked the local DDS if they could support a full-time 40-hour a week direct service person to share amongst the people on Brooklyn Street, so that people could get people who receive the services could get a break from their caregiver, as much as the caregiver getting a break from that relationship as well. So the local DDS agreed to it, and so shortly we'll be hiring somebody that will be shared amongst the 5 people that are on Brooklyn Street and their caregivers. It's really an interesting and unique model. I don't think it's ever been done before.
We were shocked when we got the yes to go ahead with that one, and we're very excited about it. You know, we're also in the process of coming up with a database, because there's a lot of people who hear about us and who call and say they have a specific skill or a specific way they'd like to get involved. You know, we had a person call and said, I love gardening. I would love to come to Brooklyn Street and start a community gardening with you folks. When they do that and our folks start helping in the garden and they start to build relationships, who knows where that leads?
Right.
The next thing you know, they're calling Jordan saying, you know, I'm kind of interested in hearing about this shared living. One of Mel's respite people, a college kid who just graduated and became a teacher, right now is going to apply to become a respite person for another family. You know, never thought that would happen when we went into three hours a week respite kind of thing. But he was watching Mel and Eric's relationship, and one day he said, you know, I could do this. I would probably love doing this. You know, we have families who have been together for 20 years, 30 years, lifelong, you know, and you don't get it right the first time. You know, Mel started for 1 year with a person who he was friends with in elementary school. The person said right from the beginning, I'm going to stay with him for 1 year till I get married. I'll help him get started back in the community, but start looking for somebody else after that year. The next person we got worked out for a while, and then it really fell apart. We're hoping third time, well, we know third time lucky. This is a wonderful match, you know, but yeah, sometimes it doesn't work out right away, or it's not forever. And then sometimes it's magic.
So any other questions? You raised the hands?
I've just got a comment. I live in New York, everyone, but I live very close to the Massachusetts border and had the opportunity to visit Brooklyn Street some months ago. I met Mary Lou there. I had already known George for many years. I'm generally very skeptical about intentional communities, because the ones that I'm familiar with are often just really congregated places. So I went to Brooklyn Street with my skepticism quite high, and I could say this is the real deal, right? Just, you know, 5 people, 5 families embedded on a street. People come to live there because there are people with disabilities there, or they know they're going to contribute. It's an amazing story. So if ever you are anywhere near North Adams, Massachusetts, you can see the real thing. That's all I wanted to say.
And we love to have people come visit us, so you certainly are welcome.
Thanks, Chris. And thanks for everyone. Appreciate you coming to this hour. You're muted, Lisa.